This is Jeff Johnson. I am getting ready to have a conversation with a man that most of you know by name, but you don't know his experience. He's an awesome preacher. He's an awesome mobilizer. Anywhere there's an issue, you're going to find him there. Stay tuned for the conversation I'm getting ready to have with Reverend Al Sharpton.
Hi, I'm Reverend Al Sharpton. I'm getting ready to have a conversation with Jeff Johnson, a very young, progressive, charismatic, really impressive young activist preacher. It's a very important conversation to talk about two men born at different times in the same space and how we deal with each other. You need to check it out.
Rev, so how did you get involved in ministry?
I was a boy preacher. My mother and father brought me when I was 3 years old to Washington Temple Church of God in Christ. I remember my mother at the end of Bishop F.D. Washington's sermon, walked down the aisle to join and took me and my little sister. My sister was 6 years old down to join. I had no idea what it was. But a year later, I was in the junior usher board. And Ronnie Dyson, who became a famous singer, was in the usher board. He was a year older than me. And they were getting ready to have the junior ushers anniversary. You know what anniversary is. We all gonna do some more program. And I said I wanted to preach. And everybody laughed. I'm 4 years old, going on 5. And everybody laughed. And Hazel Griffin, who was the adult advisor to the usher, said, "Don't laugh, maybe God's calling to preach." And she took me to the bishop. And the bishop said, "I started as a boy preacher, let him preach." And they put me up to preach. I had to stand on a box because I was too short to stand behind the pulpit. And I preached St. John's 14th chapter, "Let not your heart be troubled." And I've been preaching ever since. I started, after that he let me preach more. By the time I was 7, I was on the circuit as a Wonder Boy preacher. 9 years old, I did the World's Fair in New York with Mahalia Jackson. The rest was history.
And people don't know what it means to preach at 4 in a Kojic church.
Yeah, oh no, you had to get that. Yeah, you had to
That's
preach.
totally, I got my preacher's license in the Kojic church.
You did?
I didn't stay
How'd
in the
you start
Kojic
to preach? How'd you start?
I ran for a long time from the call. Very much like you, I was probably about 13 when I went to my pastor, Reverend James Thomas. I grew up in a black Presbyterian church in Cleveland, and had gone to him and was like, "I want to preach." And my mother was like, "You can't go do that." And
you were 13?
I was 13.
Okay.
And I had been involved in church, but there was outside of, in a Presbyterian church, there are less standard opportunities for young people to be involved in ministry on that level.
Right.
And he said, "All right." He said, let me know what you're talking about. Let me know the text you're coming from. And I'll let you do the youth sermonette during Sunday morning service. And I preach, "Is God on your team?" And then I ran and didn't come back to it until I was home during Thanksgiving break. And my mother and I had gotten to a huge fight, which we don't often do. And I don't remember what I had said to her, but I remember in response, she said, "What kind of God do you serve that allows you to talk to me that way?" No, she could have knocked me out. She could have went that way. She said, "What kind of God do you serve that allows you to talk to me that way?" And on my drive home, that kept ringing in my head over and over again. And I realized there had been a disconnect between me and God at that time. And the day I got back, one of my boys asked me to come to a revival at New Life Kojic Church Church of God in Christ in Toledo, Ohio, under Bishop James. Elder Cook was the pastor. And that during that revival, I realized I didn't want to run no more.
How old were you then?
I was 25 then. So
But you know, the two things with both of our experiences, a generation apart, is one, it is crucial that older people, particularly in the church, let younger people express themselves. Because imagine what happened if you didn't have a pastor, and I didn't have a pastor that let us preach.
That's right.
Because that could have been a psychic breakdown and a spiritual breakdown we could have never recovered from.
when there's too many young people now under that kind of leadership.
Exactly right.
And I think the confusion is that we're trying too much to equate it to are you called to preach
Right.
versus do you have something to say that
Right.
the people need
Exactly.
to hear.
Exactly.
And so we've got to, I think the ministry, the church has messed up what ministry means.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of young people and old folks alike, elders alike, they've got ministry that they've never been able to walk in because they've defined ministry as preaching.
And defined it according to training and other things that may embellish a calling, but is not the calling.
Well, and that's what I think I appreciated about the Kojic Church. I mean, being raised in a Presbyterian denomination, which is all about theology.
Right.
And is all about have you studied theology, but lacks a whole lot of spirit. It was great for me being in a Kojic church where in some cases it's on the opposite spectrum,
Right.
where there's less concern about are you theologically trained
Right.
versus do you know the word and can you walk in the spirit.
Well, see, what became interesting to me is, and like I said, I grew up Kojic, grew up in Church of God in Christ, and when I was around 12 or 13, I was pretty well known in the church circles because Washington Temple was like a big church. It was like what would be a mega church today. All the gospel singers came through there because Bishop Washington's wife was a gospel singer. I became attracted to Adam Clayton Powell and more political kind of ministers because I was enthralled. This preacher was on the news who was a congressman. And Bishop Washington, who was progressive for Kojic minister, said if he's going to be political to my mother, which at that time Church of God in Christ was not. Some even thought you had backslid, you were dealing with the world. He said, if you're going to do that, at least he should do it with the preachers. And he brought me over to Bethany Baptist Church, to Reverend William Jones, who was leading Operation Breadbasket in New York. I was about 13. Reverend Jones had gone to school with Dr. King, and I had met Dr. King just because I was in preacher circles. But Jones was a part of that. And they brought me in Breadbasket and made me the youth director. I met Reverend Jesse Jackson. And Reverend Jackson and Reverend Jones kind of mentored my political liberation theology side, which is the first time I dealt with the theology side because I never dealt with, we had to study, nothing. And I was preaching if I could read and write, which is why the hardest thing in the world for me to do now is to read a speech or a sermon because I had to learn how to read and write. I didn't have to learn how to preach, I just did that.